All right, everyone, welcome back to the Kyle Anzalone Show. We have another packed episode for everyone today. A lot of big news to talk about. Trump has not only tripled down on his plan to remove the Palestinians from Gaza, but now he's not even floating the idea that it's going to be temporary, that it's going to be permanent. So, a lot of big stories that we're talking about today, a lot of the headline news, but I also want to talk about something that isn't getting enough attention, and that is the U.S. White House. Now, the Trump administration is starting to use the Guantanamo Bay prison that was built, for the Bush era CIA torture program to house detainees that they're looking, I guess, to hold on to and not even deport. So who knows how long they're going to be there. And it seems just like the Bush administration, they're looking to set up and use Guantanamo Bay, essentially an extra constitutional prison to house people that they don't want to release, but at the same time, they don't want to deport. And so we have a lot of big stuff to get into today. This first clip is really interesting. I want to talk about just a little bit before we play it. So this is an interview of Donald Trump with Bret Baier. Now, most of this interview, about 8 minutes, aired during the Super Bowl. However, the most interesting part of the conversation doesn't get played during the Super Bowl. It actually gets played the next morning, Monday morning, on Fox and Friends. It's just like a 40-second little segment to promote the Super Bowl. But this is actually really important. So we're going to play this clip in just a second. But first, if everybody could take a second to go ahead and share this show. I know quite a few of you are already tuned in on ads. So if you're there, go ahead and hit the repost button. If you're on YouTube, thank you so much. Hit like and subscribe. And let's go ahead and play this first clip.
Think of it as a real estate development for the future. It would be a beautiful piece of land.
Would the Palestinians have the right to return?
No, they wouldn't, because they're going to have much better housing, much better. In other words, I'm talking about building a permanent place for them. Because if they have to return now, it'll be years before you could ever. It's not habitable. It will be years before it could happen. I'm talking about starting to build, and I think I could make a deal with Jordan. I think I could make a deal with Egypt. We give them billions and billions of dollars a year.
So, of course, the most important part of this is permanent. This isn't temporary, which everybody knew when Trump said that we're going to move the Palestinians from Gaza. Everybody knew the second he said that the Israelis would never allow them to return. The Israelis have been doing everything they can to make life in Gaza so miserable for decades in order to force as many Palestinians out as possible, that there was no way that they were ever going to allow them back in once they had ethnically cleansed the Strip. And so that's a really important part of this, is that Trump is now admitting to what we already knew. Now, of course, there's a lot of people who are kind of having analysis of this as Trump isn't serious about this plan. He doesn't actually intend to go through with it. It's basically just his way to strong arm some Arab states into agreeing to pay for the reconstruction of Gaza without agreeing to a Palestinian state, which is what Arab states said during the Biden administration, which is, if we rebuild Gaza, it has to be a part of the creation of a Palestinian state. We can't simply rebuild Gaza for Israel to just treat the people in there as prisoners and destroy everything whenever they decide to again. And so maybe that's happening, but Trump actually seems to have thought out this plan pretty well. And we're going to get into another clip here in a minute where he triples down on it. But I think this is something to really take seriously, that they are talking about the ethnic cleansing in Gaza. And I don't think it's just bluster. I don't think it's just an idea Trump is floating out there. I think this is a real policy he's looking at pursuing. Now, there's a couple other points I want to make on that clip. And one is that Trump keeps talking out of both sides of his mouth on the issue when it comes to the Palestinians. One, it's going to be impossible for the Palestinians to remain in Gaza while that is rebuilt. But he's saying that we're going to build them these big new great communities all over the Middle East. But where are they going to live in the in-between period is an important question. In one sense, he's saying it's going to take so long to rebuild Gaza that they can't stay there, but that, we're going to build them big, beautiful places, other places. Well, both of those things are going to take an extended period of time. And so why can't the Palestinians remain in Gaza if they are going to have to, be living in shelters essentially for years, either way that this goes? And so that's a problem. But he's also saying that the Palestinians are going to love their new communities in the Sinai and Saudi Arabia, basically in territory that nobody else wants. And at the same time, Trump is saying that we're going to rebuild Gaza into this beautiful place, this beautiful real estate, it's beautiful territory. Well, why the hell wouldn't the Palestinians want to go back once you've built it into this beautiful luxury resort on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea? They're not going to prefer to live in random places in Jordan or Egypt or Syria or Saudi Arabia where they're oppressed by dictators and things like. There's no way they're going to. He's actually saying that the Palestinians are going to be so happy that they're displaced from their homes and they're put in these random spots that they're not going to actually want to go to Gaza once Trump turns into the Riviera of the Middle East. This is obviously completely insane, and it's just rhetoric that Trump is using. Now, another thing in here is he's saying we can make this happen. We give the Jordanians and the Egyptians billions of dollars. This is a part where I think Trump is actually right, that he is going to be able to pressure the Egyptian, the Jordanian government, and maybe other governments in the region to take in Palestinians. And again, I don't think any country is going to maybe take in 1 million Palestinians. I think it's going to be tens, maybe a few 100,000s in each of these locations. I think at one point Trump has talked about there may be 6 different communities, there may be 2, there may be 1, but there's going to be multiple of them, is what he's saying, around the Middle East. And so I do think this is something that Trump is going to be able to pull off. Now, people have talked about, and I do think it's right, that there's going to be meaningful resistance in Egypt, in Jordan, in Lebanon, to what Israel and the United States are going to do here. I think the problem is, the issue is that those people that want to rise up against what Israel is doing or what their own governments are doing are going to have to go through their own security forces first, right? The Egyptians, the Jordanians are bought and paid for by the Americans. The Saudis, the Emiratis, the Qataris are all in the pockets of the Americans. These governments all have American-built militaries. They have American military bases in their facilities. I'm sure there are high-ranking members of the U.S. intelligence community and the military that are involved in all the decision-making that goes on in Riyadh, in Cairo, in Damascus. And so it's not as if there's a real ability here for any of these states to suddenly rise up and go to war with the Israelis. The region over the past 2 decades has been utterly destroyed or placated by the United States and Israel. Look at Iraq. It was utterly destroyed and now has an American-built government. Syria, over a decade of civil war, utterly destroyed that country. Lebanon, multiple occupations, a governmental system enforced by the international community that ensures instability in Beirut, combined with the most recent Israeli demolition occupation of southern Lebanon. Of course, Jordan, the Egyptians absolutely bought and paid for. The Saudis, the Emiratis, Yemen, a decade of civil war, and the Houthis barely have any ability to stand up. Somalia, Ethiopia, Sudan, Libya, all effectively destroyed states. Anybody in the region who could potentially stand up to Israel, maybe other than Iran at this point, has really been destroyed and has gone to, have war in their country time and time again. And so I do think there's a real possibility that we're looking at something that could happen here. Now, the last thing I want to mention is Fox News again aired 8 minutes of this interview with Trump and Brett Baer during the Super Bowl, but they left out this massive portion here. And look, this is, I think, pretty similar to what happened on the Kamala Harris campaign, where she gave these interviews and they left out large portions of the interview that made her look bad. I think this is another example of Trump sitting down with friendly media and them constructing and releasing this interview in a very sympathetic and very friendly way to the White House. That's not the way media is supposed to work. All right, let's move on to the second clip from Trump, tripling down on the ethnic cleansing of Gaza.
Committed to buying and owning Gaza. As far as us rebuilding it, we may give it to other states in the Middle East to build sections of it. Other people may do it through our auspices, but we're committed to owning it, taking it, and making sure that Hamas doesn't move back. There's nothing to move back into. The places a demolition site. It'll be, the remainder will be demolished. Everything's demolished. I mean, you can't live in those buildings right now. They're very unsafe. But we'll make it into a very good site for future.
So I think this clip is important to play just to really hammer the point home that this is something, not that Trump floated out once to try to strong arm Netanyahu or the Arab states, but something that is truly believing, a policy that he is articulating time and time again. This is something we need to do. Now, this is something that the Trump administration is doing from the top down, but here it is from the president saying, oh, I'm worried about the Palestinians. They're living in these unsafe houses in these unsafe communities. But for the past year, we've witnessed the Palestinians have bomb after bomb after bomb rain down on them. And it's not that Trump at that time was tweeting out, we need a ceasefire, we need to bring the killing to an, he was largely on board with what the Israelis are doing. He has since given Israel the 2,000 pound bombs that Biden has withheld, authorized another $7 billion arms sale to Israel. He is setting Israel up to finish off the ethnic cleansing of Gaza after this is over. Now, I want to move on and talk about this article from Haaretz. The title is Israeli Sources Believe Netanyahu Intends to Derail Ceasefire as Delegation Heads to Qatar. And in this article, again, this is Haaretz, this is Israeli media. One source says, it's a show. Netanyahu is signaling quite clearly that he doesn't want to move on to the next phase of the ceasefire deal. He's sending a team without a mandate and without the ability to do anything. Another source says, Hamas isn't stupid. They see the politicization of the negotiations, the appointment of Netanyahu loyalists, and the statements from Smotrich and other right-wingers threatening to topple the government. They'll understand where this is headed. Although the Israeli delegation's trip to Qatar was meant to start stage 2 negotiations, a senior official clarified that the team would only discuss technical details. Israeli officials declined to specify what those details entail. And so this is from the Netanyahu playbook. We've seen it time and time again over the past 16 months, where the Israelis will have pressure from the Americans to sit down and negotiate with Hamas. And what do? They don't send negotiators with the mandate to get a deal done. They go and they say, we're observers. We'll listen to what you have to say, but I can't consent to anything. I can't even tell you Netanyahu's position. You're just going to give me information and then we're going to leave. And then the Israelis use this as propaganda. They say, we're participating in the talks. We're trying to get a deal done. We want the hostages out. We want the civilians to stop dying. But it's Hamas that refuses to negotiate. It's Hamas that's the problem here. It's Hamas that is preventing this deal from being done, when obviously the exact opposite is the case. And while in the US, you'll get slammed for repeating Hamas propaganda. You're sympathizing with the terrorists when you make these kind of statements. In Israel, it's reported in their mainstream media that this is the case, that this is what's going on. Netanyahu has made it obviously very clear that he does not intend to see this deal all the way through. Members of his administration are saying, prominent members, the finance minister of Israel is saying quite explicitly that this deal will not go into the second stage. It will not go into the point where Israel has to withdraw from the Gaza Strip, where Israel is going to start to allow the rebuilding of Gaza. That is something that simply will not happen. And so we have to see that this ceasefire has a deadline. Now, one of the other things that's mentioned in this Haaretz article is basically what Netanyahu is going to do is he's going to slowly push Hamas to break the ceasefire. And so what does that mean? Right now, the Israelis are killing 6 Palestinians every single day. Since the start of the ceasefire, over 100 Palestinians have been killed. Many of them are children under the age of 18. Many of them are elderly. All of them seem to be innocent civilians who just crossed some invisible line drawn by an Israeli sniper that says if any Palestinian crosses this, I could consider them a threat to me and I could take their life. I could fire a bullet right through their skull before they even know what's going on, before they even know they did anything wrong, before they were even asked to turn back or given any kind of warning whatsoever. They were fired upon and killed. And this is something that's happened in Gaza a lot over the past 16 months, and it's certainly happening at a much slower pace now. But for the Palestinians in Gaza, how much of this are you going to tolerate? While the world celebrates what they say is a ceasefire in Gaza, more than 100 of your people, innocent people, completely innocent people, have been killed for absolutely no reason other than the Israelis wanted to kill them. They've been quite explicit about they're thinning the population of Gaza. Now, there's a couple other things that the Israelis are doing that I think is really meant to cause Hamas to break the ceasefire. One, all the Palestinian prisoners that are being, I shouldn't say all, many of the Palestinian prisoners that are being released are showing signs of abuse, torture, neglect, so they're not being fed for days. Some of them are being beaten immediately before they're being released, and they're actually having to go into the hospital. And look, I know some of the prisoners released from Gaza, released from Hamas to Israel, some of the hostages there were in pretty bad shape. They looked like they had been significantly malnourished during their time in Gaza. At the same time, there's no food for anybody in Gaza. People are actually starving to death there. Nobody in Israel is at risk of food insecurity. In fact, the Israelis apparently have so much food that their settlers in the West Bank are going through and destroying truckloads of food that are trying to get from Jordan, the West Bank, into Gaza. And so with all this going on, it's quite obvious that when the Palestinians are malnourished and they're showing signs of disease like scabies and that they're having been tortured, this is because Israel wanted to do that. And again, if your hostages, the Palestinian hostages that are being released are being beaten just before the release, that shows pretty bad faith on the Israeli side. Now, another thing that Israel is doing is they're slowing the aid deliveries, and apparently not letting in some things like temporary housing and more tents. Now, the temporary housing is an important point here, which Trump says, oh, the Palestinians can't live in Gaza because they can't rebuild it. But there is space in Gaza where if they really want to put a bunch of tiny homes, a bunch of mobile homes and things like that, and really try to orchestrate a large community for people, they probably could do that without it taking years, in a matter of months. But it just goes to show that they really aren't concerned about rebuilding Gaza in a way that's livable for the Palestinians. And so now, actually, just today, before I record this, before we went live here, I did see that Hamas is saying that they're going to delay the release of the next 3 Israeli captives over their issues with the Israelis not living up to their end of the deal. So we can really see this agreement starting to fracture and break apart, as we speak here in this coming week. So next up, I want to move on and play a couple clips from Mike Turner, where in this first clip, I think he says something that's actually kind of true and important to recognize. So let's go and play this first clip.
One thing that this has done is it certainly has exposed the issue that the two-state solution isn't a plan and isn't a proposal. It's a slogan, because no one came forward and said this is disruptive or provocative to our two-state solution. I mean, there's no one who's the leader of it. There's no structure for it. There's no one who's working on the governance structure for West Bank.
So I think it's important to recognize what he's saying, that there is no two-state solution. Now, Mike Turner has all kinds of other reasons for why that's true. The reality is Tel Aviv will never allow a Palestinian state. If you look at how they built settlements across the West Bank, it would require a mass relocation of the Jewish settlements, of all those Jewish settlers, in order to make any kind of viable Palestinian state out of the West Bank. And without that, you obviously can't have a Palestinian state. And we see day after day after day, the Israelis are destroying more Palestinian homes in the West Bank and making it more and more and more unlivable there. And so there isn't a two-state solution. The real solution is the Israelis had to give the Palestinian people equal rights, and so they could all share that land. The problem from the Israeli perspective is equal rights in a democracy means the Palestinians get to vote too, and they may actually be a majority still in what Israel kind of defines as its borders loosely, if you count the West Bank and Gaza. And so they don't want to go down that road. They want to treat the Palestinians as second-class citizens. That, they've declared Israel to be the Jewish state, the state for the Jewish people and all other people, and not just the Palestinians, but Christians and Bedouins and Druze are all considered, a lower class of people. Now, let's play this second clip from Mike Turner. I really want to take it apart.
Do President Trump's comments help?
I think it does pose the challenge of focusing on the fact that Hamas and the Palestinians and the terrorist structure that's there needs to be dismantled, that Israel does deserve and need a peaceful structure, that the Palestinians, regardless of where they are, pose a security threat, that there is no path to a two-state solution. No one is currently working toward it.
So first off, you could tell at the very beginning he's lying he's essentially choking on his words, trying to get them out of his mouth, trying to in some way justify the proposal that Donald Trump has put forward, because in the US, all these politicians almost all of them in Congress are just subservient to the heads of their party. And so the Republicans will do any dance they can to agree with Donald Trump on every single issue. But the more disturbing part of that, of course, is he says that Palestinians pose a threat no matter where they are, which certainly sounds like not only a call for ethnic cleansing, but a total call for genocide. No matter where they are would include the Sinai, would include Jordan, would include Syria or Lebanon. And so he's saying that Palestinians are always a threat to Israelis. That is extremely concerning. And also the way he frames the whole thing. The Israelis don't deserve to live like this. They've just killed tens of thousands of people with American bombs and starved tens of thousands more to death and deaths of deprivation. And he's talking about the Israelis deserve to live in peace, but they're inflicting a genocide on a population that's completely surrounded by Israel and completely subject to the Israeli dictates. It's insane to frame everything this way. Everything always gets framed from the Israeli perspective by members of Congress. And that was honestly a shocking comment. And really the only disappointment is we don't have real journalists in this country that will sit there and ask, what are you saying, Congressman? Palestinians, no matter where they are, pose a threat to Jews? It sounds extremely racist. But on top of that, what's your proposal then? What do you call for? What's the solution here? And of course, he wouldn't have one. And that's one of the real problems, is that these politicians are always completely unchallenged. So no matter how stupid what they go around saying is, how no thought behind it, no practical, it's not in any way based in reality. If they're never being challenged, they always just assume they're right and saying really smart things. All right, so next up here, we have a clip from our National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, giving his take on Trump's plan to own Gaza and clean out the Palestinians.
You can't get to post-construction. You can't make this the Paris of the Mediterranean like Beirut was back in the 70s and give these people a better life if you've got 1.8 million people living in absolute squalor in mountains and mountains and mountains of debris. It's just President Trump is a builder. He's a deal maker in chief, and he understands that it just doesn't make sense. So for anyone, the media included, that doesn't like what he is proposing, come to us with a better plan.
Now, I did want to play this because I think for people who are trying to find some kind of window into this is Trump playing 10D chess, that this is kind of what Mike Waltz is pointing out here, that Trump is trying to get other states to make a proposal for a solution. The problem is that Israel needs to be moved. It's not other countries that need to change their perspective. And they're not talking about putting pressure on Israel here. They're talking about putting pressure on the Arab states. Again, I think the plan here is they want to pressure Saudi Arabia, particularly Saudi Arabia, into paying a lot of money to rebuild Gaza for at least some portion of the Palestinians, while paying other money to rehouse them in other places around the Middle East, and at the same time agree to a normalization with Israel in which it doesn't require Israel to agree to the creation of a Palestinian state. I think that's the real goal here, is for basically expand the Abraham Accords, which were meant to be normalization agreements between Israel and other Muslim or Arab states, that cuts out and takes the Palestinian issue off the table. So, the Americans went to the Emiratis, they went to the Bahrainians, they went to the Sudanese and the Moroccans, and they made concessions to each of those countries. We took the Sudan off of the foreign terrorists or countries that support foreign terrorist organizations list. We recognized Morocco's control over Western Sahara, their occupation there. In the UAE and Bahrain, we agreed to a lot of arms sales and to give these countries more of our weapons. And so I'm sure we're going to bribe the Saudis. During the first Trump administration, I think there were extremely dangerous negotiations going on between the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and the Saudis, where they were talking about giving the Saudis a nuclear energy program, but one that would allow the Saudis to refine their own spent nuclear waste, which could mean that they would be able to enrich the uranium and potentially create a nuclear bomb. The U.S. has made other deals with other countries where we provided them technology, but we do the refining of the spent nuclear fuel. We don't allow those countries to do it, so they won't be able to develop a nuclear bomb. And I think that's really something that would be on the table for the Saudis and the Trump administration if they do decide to go down this road. So I think it's a very dangerous path to pursue. So next up, I just want to show this picture of a pager that was given to Donald Trump from Benjamin Netanyahu. And I think it's important to show the depravity of these two people. So this pager, it's a golden pager. It's glued to what is, I've seen reported as olive wood and potentially a stump of an olive tree that was taken from southern Lebanon. And then, the pager was attached to it. And of course, it's a pager because Israel used pagers in essentially a terrorist attack at what was identified by even former American officials as a terrorist attack on the people of Lebanon by setting off all these pagers. And so this is just absolutely disturbing. And I really hope that Trump has the good sense not to press any of these buttons on this pager, because who knows what Netanyahu set up in store for him. So before we wrap up the show today, I want to talk about this situation going on at the American torture prison in Guantanamo Bay. And we have this new, was her title, Secretary of Homeland Security, puppy murderer Kristi Noem, has some statements that she wants to explain what's going on with American immigration policy. So let's go ahead and play this first clip from Noem.
Problems like no potable water, dilapidated housing, mold, access to medical and health care. Can you tell us that you were just there? What are the conditions?
It was not like that at all. I don't know what they're talking about. Maybe that was under the Biden administration or previously, but it was not like that at all. And our Army is there working hard to stand up the facilities and to meet our standards to make sure that we can use it in a way that it has always been used, but use it properly. We've had migrants there before. We are doing it again. We're going to use our assets that we have to make America safe again. And those claims are not happening today. I don't know what date they're referring to.
So what Kristi Noem here is doing is a very crazy and very sadistic sleight of hand, where there was this report that came out that there's a few facilities that in U.S. occupied Cuba, Guantanamo Bay. One of them is on the naval base, and that's the CIA torture prison, where we house the people, what the Bush administration called the worst of the worst. Turned out that most of the people that sent there were innocent of the crimes they were accused of. There are some actual terrorists that still remain in Guantanamo Bay, but people that the U.S. can't prosecute because under the Bush administration, we tortured all the confessions out of them. And of course, that won't stand up in court. And so now they can't go to jail, and they just kind of linger at Guantanamo Bay. So that facility has remained open for the past 2.5 decades almost now. I think it was opened in 2002. There's also a naval base and a separate migrant detention facility. And in the past, when the U.S. has intercepted people, either trying to traffic drugs into the United States, or maybe people trying to get from Haiti or Cuba into the United States by raft, they were intercepted and sent to this migrant detention facility. It hasn't often been used, and that is the facility that's reported to be in disrepair. However, the Trump administration, is now using not the migrant detention facility, but rather the torture prison, the CIA detention facility to house these migrants. And so initially, Trump said that he wanted to ramp up this migrant detention facility, the separate one, and that was going to have 30,000 beds. That was an executive order. And then a few days later, we get the report that, oh, no, that's not where they're sending the migrants. They're actually sending them to the torture prison. And so let's hear what Noam has to say about the people we're sending there.
The government cannot attempt to subvert the statutory and constitutional rights afforded to these non-citizens in the U.S. by transferring them to an offshore prison and holding them incommunicado without access to counsel or any means of contact with the outside world. First of all, can you speak to whether that is an accurate characterization? And what do you say in response to their claims about legal rights for these folks?
You know, that's just bull. And I just wish they would grow up and really recognize what we're doing here. What we're doing is, of course, we're giving due process to migrants. We've done that all the time, following the same procedures we always have been. But where are they advocating for the children that are missing, that Joe Biden lost? Why are they not advocating for these families that have lost children? Laken Riley's family, Jocelyn's family. Why are they not out there fighting for them and saying, thank you, Mr. President, for making sure that our kids aren't going to continue to be killed by drugs and trafficking and have dangerous criminals robbing small businesses in our hometowns? I mean, just get your priorities straight. This is about America. So start focusing on them instead of focusing on these dangerous people. I watched a plane load of people unload at Gitmo that were pedophiles, child pornographers. They were drug dealers in our communities that literally these cartels are partnering with the Chinese to kill our next generation of Americans. That's who we're putting down there at Gitmo. And I'm just so thankful that they're not in our country anymore.
So this is absolute George W. Bush era insanity. This fear mongering that's coming out from mouths. I mean, listen to what she's saying. She's saying that we're sending pedophiles, child pornographers, and then the next person on the list is a drug dealer. Like, there's not a major difference between a drug dealer and a pedophile. I'm sure people might not judge too much to pedophiles going to Guantanamo Bay, but certainly somebody just accused of being a drug dealer, you're going to send them off to Gitmo? That's absolute insanity. And she says, oh, they get due process and all of this, but it doesn't seem that that's the case. We have multiple human rights organizations trying to identify who's in Gitmo. And in fact, when it was initially reported by the Trump administration, they didn't say that these were pedophiles. They just said that they were gang members. And again, listen to this rhetoric. She's a very smooth sleight of hand where she doesn't even really address the constitutional concerns, right? This is supposed to be the United States of America. We have a Bill of Rights. A part of what makes our country truly great is the rights that people here have: the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression, the right to a trial, and not some corrupted trial in a torture prison, in a military detention facility. That's not what we're talking about. That's not what the United States is supposed to be. And she's saying we can't be concerned about all that because the Chinese are working with these gangs to kill the next generation of American children. What the hell is she talking about? How could this possibly be what is this? She has no proof of any of this. She's just making it up to scare you, so you don't ask the important questions, so you don't go through and say, wait, what are we doing here? Are we really starting to ship people from America to Gitmo? And look, Trump has made it clear they might be there for some time. Let's go ahead and put up the full screen of my article. I've been covering this for the Libertarian Institute over the past couple of weeks. And this latest article that I wrote is, according to several sources speaking with NBC News, the migrants will not be sent to the migrant facility, but rather the infamous torture prison. The majority of the immigrants sent to Guantanamo under Trump's plan are expected to be held in temporary camps near the prison before being transported to their home country. But those considered by the administration to be the most dangerous criminals are expected to be held separately at the facility used to hold detainees accused of terrorism. On Trump's first day in office, he signed an executive order that instructed his staff to consider designating some Central American drug cartels as foreign terrorist organization. It's unclear under what legal authorities Trump is using to send the detainees to the prison. He suggested the migrants could be at the facility for an extended period of time, saying that we can't trust to send them back to their home countries. And during the Bush presidency, the facility was used to deny detainees their constitutional rights. And I think there certainly is a real risk that we're going to go down that road once again. So, I mean, that's about all I have on this. I'm certainly not like a constitutional expert. I can't go into all the legal behind this, but we could obviously see that this is the wrong way to go. What really needs to happen, and what was the case, was that the Gitmo was a shame on America's legacy. It hurt our global standing. It showed that our Bill of Rights really wasn't an ultimate protector of our rights, but rather just a piece of paper that could be trampled on at any time. And so it was really important to close this facility to end this shameful legacy in the United States of America. But rather than doing that, Trump has put this absolute lunatic sociopath. Look, everybody knew she talked about bragged about killing her puppy. Nobody could be surprised that if you give a woman like that this much power, that these kind of things are going to happen. And she is making direct comparisons to the Bush presidency. She is saying, oh, we're sending the worst, the exact same phrase that Dick Cheney used. And again, in the past, it was shown that the majority of people sent here really weren't terrorists. They weren't guilty of what they were being accused of. Likely the same is going to be true this time around. And so let's stand on guard. Let's continue to fight against these kind of things, because they're really going to be pushing them in the Trump administration. We got 4 years of it, guys. All right, everybody. Thank you all so much for once again tuning into the Kyle Anzalone Show. We'll be back with another episode soon. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.